Hello there, welcome back to IndyCar on, what's the date today? I have to double check my dates as usual, 29th of November. Coming up to St Andrew's Day tomorrow. An interesting time for Scotland and a time of celebration usually. Now, I know that as far as independent support in Scotland is concerned, and people like yourself and myself, there's not been very much good news recently, and actually finding little rays of hope anywhere in the news media is relatively difficult. But then suddenly along comes a huge glaring beam of sunlight this week with the arrival of a new Ipsos Mori poll, which puts independent support at a whopping 54%. Unbelievable. And just at the time when we were all beginning to lose hope that anything would ever happen and that independent support might be fracturing and beginning to dissolve, along comes a poll which confirms almost the exact opposite. It's shot up from hovering around the sort of 49–50% mark to a whopping 54%. And what's driving that, you have to ask? Well, it certainly isn't the political parties. And I'm being charitably, I'm talking about all the pro-independence parties, all three of them. There is not much in the way of, what should we say, of actual news about the process that we need to go through to get independence from any of the political parties. We have different offerings from both the SNP, ALPA and the Greens about the status of their support for independence. We know already from Humza Yousaf and his own party's policy that they plan to use the next general election as a way of voting for independence. And in their methodology, a win in terms of seat majority would be the trigger point to begin negotiating with the United Kingdom over the ending of the Union. In contrast to that, ALBA has more or less dispensed with the idea, I suppose, of any kind of independence referendum, arguing that any vote count in any general election in which it is made crystal clear that a vote for an independence party counts as a vote for independence is another way, I guess, of using a general election to produce a vote, not a seat count, but a vote majority in favour of independence. And that vote majority, I think, is one of the key elements in any strategy for gaining independence. Now, the Greens, for their part, have been strangely quiet on the subject of independence recently, but they have been making an awful lot of noise about their involvement in the scheme with the SNP to replace all of Scotland's domestic heating boilers with new low carbon or zero carbon systems by 2025. They wanted to start the process. Now that has been pushed back to 2028. That idea has been shelved largely because of basically the budget cuts by the United Kingdom government, making such programs as that extraordinarily difficult to begin. So we don't see a great deal of hope from the political parties about how Scotland is going to get out of the Union. ALBA, I suspect, and the SNP in some key ways, there's some commonality in their approaches here, but the benchmark necessary, the actual standard, the amount of people voting for independence, triggering any kind of negotiation with the United Kingdom, has to really be a vote count, because that's what a referendum would do. And this is why ALBA, I believe, has changed its manifesto to make it a vote count rather than a seat count in order to trigger, if you like, a victory. Where the two parties, I think, have lost the support of many people is the fact that the process for gaining independence appears to rest on negotiating with the UK, something which I've repeatedly said the United Kingdom will not do. And in fact, the Tory party and the Labour Party have both vehemently said that they will not allow another independence referendum, which means that a Section 30 order cannot be negotiated with the UK, which leaves the SNP's policy a little vague and nebulous, to say the very least. ALBA's offering is slightly clearer. They want to start negotiating to end the Union based on a vote win. In other words, 50% of the available votes from that electorate plus one vote. Anything over 50% would trigger negotiations. Now, again, ALBA is a little bit unclear about what these negotiations are for. What is it exactly we're negotiating? Are we negotiating the end of the Union? Are we negotiating a share out of Scotland's resources? What exactly is it that we're negotiating? That is not entirely clear to me. As far as the Greens are concerned, I think independence comes distantly down their list of priorities. They are far more interested, as they should be as a Green Party, in decarbonising the Scottish economy, which is fair enough. But I think if all three parties stand a hope of producing a combined vote count, they actually need to get together and do that. And at the moment, there isn't any sign of this. So that leaves us in a situation where the people of Scotland, 54% of us, want independence. And if we're given a process in which we can demonstrate that by a vote count, then that would necessarily basically end the Union, because if more than 50% of us in the electorate which is registered to vote, so the franchise of the Scottish electorate, if more than 50% of us vote for pro-independence parties in that general election next year, that should trigger the ending of the Union. Never mind negotiations, it should be the end of the Union, because the people have spoken. But how do we enforce that? And that is the key element here, which is not disclosed by any political party. Many political commentators from the independence movement feel that the established parties of independence, that is the SNP, ALPA and the Greens, are worried about any kind of confrontation with the United Kingdom should we actually win a vote count in any general election. And I'm not sure exactly what it is they think will happen, or what threats might have been issued to them should they go down this road from the British government. It's entirely possible that the British state has warned all of the, shall we say, the registered political parties in Scotland that if they stray onto the territory of the Constitution, there will be severe ramifications. That could be the ending of devolution as we know it, could be the closure of Holyrood if we do this, it could be all sorts of things. But anyway, the fear of these ramifications appears to have stopped the political parties from actually giving us any detail on what the process should be. And that leaves us with one critical thing that we need to do, and that is to work out the international legal case for Scottish self-determination, and to make representations, as I've said so many times on this programme, to the United Nations, to the International Court of Justice, to the European Union, the Council of Europe, the European Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights. There are so many of these multinational and international organisations which are effectively the ultimate arbiters of freedom of expression and of self-determination for all nations, which is underscored and written into the very bedrock of the United Nations Charter. And that is happening in the background, although we can't see it, and for operational reasons, the people concerned in preparing that can't make it public. But I'll return to this subject later on, in a little bit later in this programme. But I wanted to fill you in on one or two other details that have cropped up recently today. And I was reading an article on LinkedIn by the CEO of a French shipbuilding company which manufactures 1,100-ton sail-driven cargo ships. And according to him, in France at the moment, his yard has a full order book for brand new sail-driven cargo ships, the first two of which are nearing completion and will be commissioned and actually operating within the next 12 months. But the reason for his article was because of new political moves being made by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Union. And in this, the European Union has adopted new legislation which gives equal status both to sail cargo ship builders and those who are proposing to build shipping which is powered by liquefied hydrogen. Now, at first glance you might think, well, liquefied hydrogen is a carbon zero fuel, because when you burn that with oxygen or air, it produces merely steam. It also produces plenty of power. Unfortunately, hydrogen as a fuel, liquid hydrogen particularly, has to be stored at incredibly low temperatures. That would be something like 253 degrees below freezing in order for it to remain a liquid, and that poses problems in shipping because the tanks would need to be insulated, and then there's a thing called boil-off, where the gas, as the liquid is used up, the gas boils off because it has such a low boiling temperature, and that gas has to be vented. So you lose some of the hydrogen in the process of storing it in the shipping. The other problem with hydrogen, which, okay, is a little bit technical, is that it has to be separated from natural gas at the moment using an industrial process involving superheated steam, which is very, very far from being green. So although the fuel itself is green, the process necessary to separate it at the moment isn't. So this guy from the French sail cargo ship builders was saying that it now places his company and his industry at a severe disadvantage, having to compete with companies which don't want to change their engines from internal combustion at all, but you simply want to change to this fuel. And that is disadvantaging the French sail cargo ship industry itself and making it more difficult for them to fill their order books and to produce more and more sail cargo ships. Now you might think, well, sailing ships went out in the 19th century. In the 1900s, early 20th century, they were replaced by diesel, heavy oil burning ships and coal. However, the fact of the matter is that wind is an abundant resource on the sea, and ships which carry cargo which are propelled by the wind use zero fuel. They don't produce any carbon at all, except perhaps in the manufacturing. And so they're as good as you can get. The reason I'm mentioning this is, although in the past I've also mentioned this in relation to Scotland, Scotland could have an immense sail cargo ship building industry if it chose to invest in it. Shipyards, for example, like Ferguson Marine, have the capacity to build ships like this, of this kind of tonnage, about 1,100 tons. So a small scale ship in terms of what it can hold, but if you build fleets of them and enough of them, you can sail cargo anywhere in the world for the cost of just the crew, because the wind is pretty much free. There may be electric propulsion on board for docking maneuvers and things like that, but essentially the ship gets all of its energy from its environment. Scotland could be at the forefront of this as well, but the reason I mention it is because although I was against us leaving the European Union when the United Kingdom dragged Scotland out against our expressed democratic wishes, the fact of the matter is that if we go back into the EU after we become independent, then we are then going to be constrained by this exact same law. If, however, we were to, for example, join the European Free Trade Association, have free trade with the EU, free travel, and all the other benefits which are associated with that, we do not have the same problems with legislation regarding the building of sail cargo ships here, and we could develop a brand new industry on the Clyde or on the Forth or any other shipbuilding area in Scotland which is suitable for the purpose, and we could have fleets of hundreds of these vessels sailing all across the globe carrying Scottish exports and bringing imports to Scotland without any carbon being produced. So actually staying out of the EU after we're independent might have some advantages for us, and I think that's worth bearing in mind. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the programme hope as being one of the essential ingredients in the Scottish independence fight, which seems to have evaporated recently. However, I can tell you that moves, legal moves to establish Scotland's claim for self-determination internationally are continuing. And not only that, but they're moving to another phase. I can't talk about it, I can't tell you who is doing it, and I can't explain to you why the process is being kept under wraps. But the reason, obviously, is because this is a delicate operation. It requires certain steps to be taken from an international law point of view before it can be done. But it is happening in the background, and it will continue to do that until representations are ready to be made to these international bodies, at which point that may well be our best bet for getting the recognition that we need if we win a seat count majority in any future general election. However, and there's always a but in these things, if that is to happen, then all three of the pro-independence parties would need to agree a manifesto strategy to achieve it. And this is where we come back to party politics, the part of Scotland's political environment which has so far failed to produce the courage and the bold conviction to get this done. But these two things together would produce the result we want, because if we do succeed in getting a vote count, either at the next general election in the UK or at any future general election in Holyrood, where we have the same electorate registered, if we get that majority of the vote, that's a clear, not just a mandate, that is an order from the people of Scotland to end the Union Treaty, which is voluntary according to the United Kingdom. And if we voluntarily say we don't want it anymore, and we have the backing of the international legal community, which says, or has made a ruling that says Scotland's people and their democratic voice has to be obeyed, that makes it extraordinarily difficult for the rest of the United Kingdom to stand in the way. And even if they did, Scotland could still separate itself from the Union on its own, by its own volition, if you like, because of its own electorate and because of its own majority, and that would be respected under international law through the United Nations and these international courts. But it needs to be done with both. At the moment, I know that, or as far as I know, let's put it that way, the political parties are not involved in that process of international legal representation. That is being done elsewhere. However, it is incumbent on all three of the pro-independence parties to stop bickering and to come up with a clear strategy which every voter understands means that they are voting for independence at every single general election. What differs here is the benchmark, the standard of the vote that's required. Now remember, the Ipsos poll, which was published today in the National, says that 54% of the Scottish electorate who would vote in a referendum on independence intend to vote for independence. That's an almost complete reversal of the alleged result in 2014. It would mean that if we assumed, for example, that the electorate of Scotland is approximately 4 million registered voters, that somewhere in the region of 2.8 million of us would have voted for independence if 54% of us vote for pro-independence parties in any general election. But it depends on the parties getting together and making that pre-election manifesto absolutely crystal clear, without a shred of doubt, that that's what people are voting for. And it would take a big turnout. It would mean a big campaign to get as many pro-independence voters registered as possible, to make sure they don't fall foul of the ID laws introduced by the UK to reduce the number of anti-Tory voters in the voters' roll. So there's a lot to be done here, and it means pulling several threads together to achieve it. Anyway, I hope my explanation of the situation today makes some sense to you, but I think it's interesting that the European Union has chosen to give equal status to hydrogen-powered shipping as it does to sail, something which I think at the present moment is entirely wrong, because until hydrogen is only produced from, let's say, surplus wind energy or solar energy, we can't claim that fuel to be green, and the ships using it would not be cutting the carbon emissions. They would simply move the carbon emissions to the process which created the fuel instead. Again, doesn't do anything for the environment and does nothing to reduce global warming or the climate changing. So we have opportunities here if we take the right steps with the parties and with the legal experts in the background, making the necessary contacts with international bodies, and we stay out of the EU initially after independence so that we can maintain and grow a new sail-driven shipping industry. We have every chance of making it not only as an independent state, but being the very first zero-carbon state which exports all over the world. There's so much to be done here, and the opportunities for us to succeed are enormous. The problem is that politicians are too frightened, and the support for independence, although massively high, is not reflected as much in support for political parties. I have to say that at the moment, according to Ipsos Mori, the SNP is leading Labour by 10 percentage points in the predictions for the next general election. But if, and only if, the SNP were to say in their new pre-election mandate, or a pre-election manifesto, sorry, that a vote count of more than 50% would result in Scotland declaring the Union over, that would have a massive galvanising effect on people who want independence. There are a lot of people who would, at the moment, who are not engaged with independence, they're not engaged with anything, they're put off by politics. If you give them a process, and I think Peter Bell echoed this in one of his recent articles, if people are shown that there is a process for gaining independence and there is an election where you can vote for it, they are far more likely to change their minds to a yes vote than to hang back and not vote at all. Remember, pro-independence voters like ourselves are always going to vote for independence. It's the people who used to be called soft nose, but are really not even engaged in politics. They're non-political voters. These are the people who would be motivated the most if there was a process. And if the process could be shown to lead to independence directly without future negotiations of any kind, they're far more likely to back it. Anyway, a complicated edition of the programme. I hope you find it useful and gives you an idea of how the current political climate looks and what we need to do in order to make this work in the future. But somebody, somewhere in all three political parties needs to listen to this kind of analysis and talk to the other parties about a formal agreement between all three which shows that there's a pathway and a process to independence which is not dependent on seat count, something which the United Kingdom would never accept. A vote count is critical, but it must lead to independence and not to negotiating with the UK, because they just simply won't do it. Anyway, that's it from this complicated edition of IndyCar. I'm glad to be back, and I also wanted to thank a few people who've been making donations recently. One who turned up a donation in my fund recently for over £100, which, to be honest with you, I thought I'd read it wrong. I thought it was £10 initially, but it actually was 100. So thank you to everyone who continues to support this programme. I will be here for as long as necessary to get Scotland free of the Union and to re-establish this country the way it should be and the way it should always have been from the start. Anyway, I hope you have a happy St. Andrew's Day tomorrow, and I will see you, I hope, in a few days' time. Bye for now.